So tonight, we're going to talk about a completely senseless murder that happened in 1983 when a young woman is found dead and she's lying in a pool of her own blood at the gas station she was working at. Now, numerous people witnessed the man fleeing the scene, except they just couldn't agree on what he was wearing. They did agree, though, that it was definitely a Mexican with a mustache. So let me get this out of the way, that this case will trigger some people, such as our Latino homies that might be rocking a mustache right now. Other than that, it will involve a young mother being murdered and some mind-boggling police incompetence. Add a little race to that, and you'd have a giant scandal that put the entire state of Texas on notice. It's a sad case overall, but there's a twist at the end of this story that would make it a complete tragedy. My name is Monks. Have you ever known a cup to lie to you? Okay, so to start this story, let me introduce you to 24-year-old Wanda Lopez. Now, she's a young, beautiful mother of an adorable baby girl, which if I had to guess, I would say she's about 3-4 years old now. Wanda didn't have the easiest life, but she did her best to make sure her family had what they needed, even if it meant working the night shift, all alone, at a gas station in a less than wholesome part of Corpus Christi. And when I say less than wholesome, you know I mean the ghetto. The date is February 4th of 1983. Wanda is diligently manning her cash register at the Sigmore Shamrock as customers trickle in and out of the convenience section of the gas station where she worked at. So at 8 p.m. that night, Wanda is on guard, extremely vigilant, as she should be, as a couple of customers are in the store and they're shopping. One of the customers' name is Kevin Baker. Now, just keep his name in mind because he's going to be pivotal in the story. So Wanda discreetly keeps an eye on the customers, as we're all trained to do in this, line of business, until a figure of a man outside caught her attention. Now, there was just something unnatural about the way he was pacing back and forth, like he was preparing himself, psyching himself up to do something. He was odd enough to garner the attention of Wanda while customers were in the store, enough to even get the attention of Kevin Baker. And then she saw it. He was clutching something that appeared to be the handle of a knife, and he was trying to conceal it in his pocket. And then he did exactly what she was afraid of. He came inside the store, and at this point, we could only imagine how fast Wanda's heart was beating. But she was quick on her feet because she immediately grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Wanda made it very apparent what she was doing, who she was calling, but that did nothing to deter that man from walking right up to Wanda, invading her space, and his demands were simple. He wanted all the money from the register. And of course, Wanda would comply. I mean, she was sure he had a knife in his pocket, and she had a baby girl she needed to get home to. She opened the register and allowed the man to fill his pockets with the money. So now he had what he wanted, and she was clearly on the phone with the police. Now, for any typical criminal, this would be enough to persuade them to leave. But this man, he just stood there, and he stood there with a rage in his eyes. And just know that Wanda had no idea who this man was. He wasn't wearing a mask, nor did the man even know her. But he hated her. And then the knife came out. Now, what the police operator would hear in the next few seconds would most likely haunt him for the rest of his life. So I did some digging, and I found the entire transcript of the call between Wanda and the dispatch. And the whole situation, it was recorded to have lasted 77 seconds before he would lose communication. And then I did some further digging, and I found the actual phone call. Now that I've painted you the scenario, it's going to make the audio you're about to hear that much more intense, and it's extremely distressing, and truly, your discretion is advised.
Come to 2602 South Point Island. I have a suspect a knife inside the store.
What place is this?
Sigmore.
What's he doing with a knife?
I don't know, he was outside bringing a ride off of this guy. He just told me right now, he just came and said something.
he threatened you or
Not
anything?
yet. Can you have some money?
What does he look like?
Okay.
What does he look like?
I think that's me standing right here in the camera.
Huh?
Can't talk. Thank you.
Ma'am,
What?
don't hang up, okay?
Okay. Here. There you go.
Where is he at now?
Right here.
Is he a white male?
No.
Black?
No.
Hispanic?
Yes.
Tall? Short?
Uh-huh.
Tall?
Yeah. Thank you.
Does he have a knife pulled out?
Not yet.
Is it in his pocket?
Mm-hmm.
We'll get somewhere with it.
You want it? I'll give it to you. I'm not going to do nothing to him.
Hey, get your to the camera. 2602 South Padre. Got an armed robbery going down right now.
This call literally induces this panic type feeling every time I listen to it. There's just a chill that goes through my body knowing exactly what's happening on the end of that call. And I cut it off when Wanda starts to scream because, hey, by then you get the point, right? So Wanda's screams would prompt the dispatcher to escalate the situation to all the patrol cars. The police would arrive promptly, but unfortunately, Wanda had already died, having been stabbed to death, lying in a pool of her own blood, like I mentioned before. Now, Wanda's story reminded me that everything can be taken away from us, you know, just like that. That none of us are special. We all die. And in Wanda's case, for no apparent reason at all. And how do you explain to a 3-year-old about death? Okay? So Wanda's daughter would be deprived of a mother just because a killer one night decided he had to kill somebody. So when police start to question witnesses, this is when things start to get a bit confusing about the clothing part. The one witness in the store, Kevin Baker, stated that he saw a Hispanic man with a mustache, flannel jacket over a gray hoodie and dark pants, committed the heinous crime right in front of him. But then 2 more people would come forward and describe the same mustached Hispanic man running away from the scene, but says that he was wearing an untucked white dress shirt with his sleeves rolled up and also dark pants. But regardless, the description of both outfits were relayed to the officers who were frantically already canvassing the area. But soon, they would catch a break when the neighborhood of Franklin Drive, just about a block away from the Shamrock, residents were dialing in about a man hiding underneath a truck. Units were dispatched to investigate, and they indeed found a man hiding underneath a truck. They pulled him out, and he was exactly who they were looking for, fitting the second description down to the mustache. He was 20-year-old Carlos De Luna. He was placed in a squad car and brought back to the scene of the crime, where Kevin Baker would positively identify him as the killer. So I'm assuming the next thing we want to know, and investigators wanted to know, was why did Carlos have to kill Wanda when she gave him the money? Well, the answer was simple from Carlos. He didn't do it. He was just hanging out with an old friend. When he heard sirens, he just took off running. And of course, hid underneath a truck. I mean, what else would you do at that point? Well, detectives decided to pry into his past, as they do, and they found a criminal record for sexual assault. So what did Carlos have to say to that? He said, well, that's why he ran, because he has a record. He saw a man attacking this cashier, and in his head, if he remained, he was afraid that he would be pinned for the murder. Now, to the cops, this story was weak. The cops weren't buying it, and he was detained for the brutal killing of Wanda Lopez. And when the autopsies came out, it was revealed that he had stabbed her twice with a lock blade buck knife. Her left breast was sliced, which cut an artery, which bled her to death. Now, with such a violent, completely unnecessary killing, he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, don't forget, this is Texas 1983, and death means death. Now, moving ahead to 1989, this is 6 years on death row now for Carlos De Luna. With his execution date looming, it was just days away. Carlos De Luna was finally ready to come clean about what happened that night. And the story he told No one could have ever guessed. So the beginning of his story remained the same, but with details now that he was hanging out with a longtime friend of 5 years, and this time his friend had a name. Carlos Hernandez. Coincidentally, they stood about the same height, they had a similar build, and even sported the same mustache. Same first name, apparently. So the night that they went to the gas station together, De Luna, thinking Hernandez just needed to buy something real quick, accompanied his friend to the Sigmore Shamrock, right? But before they would go in, they went behind the building and they pounded a few beers, smoked a few cigarettes, discarding everything on the grass, of course. Now Hernandez then walks to the front of the store, and De Luna would follow shortly. Now he saw his friend Hernandez pacing about, fumbling with something in his pocket. Before he knew it, Hernandez was attacking the store clerk. Mortified by what he was seeing, De Luna starts running from the scene. Once he heard sirens, he panicked, crawled underneath the truck. So police, to their credit, by the way, would give Carlos De Luna the benefit of the doubt and put in efforts to find this Carlos Hernandez. But they came up empty. So they concluded that it was just a convenient story concocted by De Luna, just in case, it would benefit him in some way. I mean, he was already on death row, so why would trying anything hurt at this point, right? And that same year, in 1989, Carlos De Luna would have his final meal and then his final breath as he was executed by lethal injection. And here we have to pay respects to the man's family, because no matter what he may have done, he was still somebody's child, and good people were mourning his loss. And imagine the sheer heartache when they learned that he was innocent. So there's definitely nothing good to come out of a story like this except maybe anguish and anger. And let me try to add you to the anger club, the one that I joined when I researched this story. Now, know this, that Carlos De Luna was basically sentenced to death with the eyewitness account of just one man, the man I asked you to keep your mind on, Kevin Baker. Not to say that Baker is a bad person by any means. He witnessed the crime happen firsthand, and it probably traumatized him immensely. But without mincing words, his ability to distinguish one Mexican from another Mexican was not good. And we know this because 20 years later, he would admit that he just went with instincts when identifying the killer. Now, I want to preface that the next part of this story is about the stellar police work that killed an innocent man. And this isn't any way my view of law enforcement as a whole. I appreciate the good ones that risk their lives every day. My sister is even dating a cop. If that means that kind of sounds like, yeah, I could say that because I have a black friend, that. Anyway, this will be merely the critique of a certain Corpus Christi police force in 1983, okay? So, first off, no fingerprints of any use were found on the scene, which doesn't come as a surprise when it was learned of how poorly trained the department was in the field of fingerprint analysis anyways. But this next part I had to read again and again when it said that no blood samples were taken. In a knife attack? Did they just assume that all the blood belonged to the victim? How many times have we heard the story of the victim's blood coating the killer's knife, making the grip slippery so he winds up slicing his own hand? You know that story. Maybe I just watched too much true crime, but this glaring error makes me wonder now, did they even try with the fingerprints? And get ready for this one. The killer steps on the blood. His shoe print is embedded into the blood, as well as leaving bloody footprints here and there. A wonderful clue that could indicate the killer's shoe size. The pattern of the shoe could probably indicate the shoe brand, but absolutely no measurements were taken. But they took some nice pictures. And the discarded beer cans and cigarette butts by Carlos and Carlos, well, the cops found that as well. But none of them were forensically tested. But once again, at least they took some nice pictures. Wanda's fingernails were never analyzed for skin. Now, if she happened to have scratched her assailant, oh wells. Quick trivia. So how did the detectives know that it was a lock blade buck knife that killed Wanda Lopez. I mean, that's a pretty specific knife. Not specific in the way that it made it apparent due to the wounds, like if it was serrated or something, which is not. No. Its main trait is simply that it would unfold at the press of a button. Other than that, it was a rather nondescript murder weapon. Well, that's because it was left at the scene. And would it surprise you by now when I tell you that it was not forensically analyzed? I mean, who wants to do that anyways, right? Yucky blood and evidence all over it. And need I remind you that this was a gruesome crime scene with blood smeared on the counter, register floor, blood splatter just everywhere. That being said, there's no conceivable way the killer would have been able to get away blood-free, right? Even if he discarded all his clothes as he ran, he'd still have some traces on him. And I belabor that fact to tell you this. When they pulled Carlos de Luna out from under that truck, he did not have a single drop of blood on him. Now let's go ahead and read the final chapter of How to Fuck Up a Crime Scene 101. Allow the owners of the business to start cleaning up just 2 hours after a horrific murder. Class dismissed. But monks, how do you even know about these missteps the police made? Did they snitch on themselves? No, of course not. It was all brought to light when Professor James Liebman and a team of Columbia Law School students decided to dissect the case and concluded that the state of Texas likely executed an innocent man in 1989. And the imaginary character, this Carlos Hernandez, well, he really did exist. As the real detectives of James Liebman interviewed more than 100 witnesses, examined up to 900 source files. From this, they found a woman that was able to connect Carlos's together. She provided a birth date for which the new Carlos, which opened up a very troubling criminal past of alcoholism, but most importantly, get this, violence against women. He was even the prime suspect of the killing of a woman named Dalia Sauceda in 1979. A stabbing, of course. They also discovered logs of the night after Wanda's murder that the police did chase another man, matching the killer's first description. They chased him for a whole 30 minutes before losing him. It was learned that Carlos Hernandez was also well known to law enforcement already, even prior to Wanda's murder. And yes, I know this is exhausting. How can a PD make so many errors? And how they knew Hernandez. Yikes. This is going to be troublesome as well because it turns out that he was a great little snitch for them, a valuable informant, as they would call him. He was allowed to get away with numerous crimes. As long as he kept up with the intel, he remained perpetually on parole until he finally did something the detectives could not ignore at all. Can you guess what he did? This is after Wanda's murder, mind you, just to keep you on the timeline. He murdered a woman with a lock blade buck knife. Sound familiar? He then stabbed yet another woman and tried to assault her as well. All this while Carlos de Luna was rotting in prison. His family described de Luna as having the worst time in prison. He was scared, alone, losing faith in everything as the clock ticked closer to his demise. Now, Carlos Hernandez was known to brag, joke that his twin was innocent, that Wanda was his kill, like a badge of honor or something. But for some reason, none of this made a difference for de Luna's case. So finally, police had to arrest Carlos Hernandez for murder, and he would finally be thrown in prison in 1989. The same year Carlos de Luna was executed. It's so fucked up when you think about it. And I don't know if you're going to find this even more fucked up, but Hernandez, then he would serve just 10 years of his sentence. But he was sent to hell by his liver. That alcoholism I mentioned earlier finally caught up to him, and he died of cirrhosis in 1999. Now, on June 2006, Wanda Lopez's brother Richard issued a statement. After carefully reviewing the information recently uncovered and printed by Stephen Mills and Maurice Posley in the Chicago Tribune, I am convinced that Carlos de Luna did not kill my sister and that Carlos Hernandez was the real murderer. A wonderful gesture from one grieving family to another. And we could hope that they found the peace that they deserve, especially Wanda's baby girl, who should be now in her 40s, possibly by... I hope she lived a beautiful life as her mom watches from above. Now, indeed, the Corpus Christi PD really fumbled the ball in 1983, but there's no one else to solely blame but Carlos Hernandez, just a vile human excrement, who I do believe got what he deserved. Because in the end, I read that he died from cirrhosis, which is a chronic and slow death, which comes with a horrible pain that intensifies up to the very end. And I do hope that Carlos Hernandez felt every bit of that pain. So whether or not Carlos de Luna had a hand or even knowledge in the killing of Wanda Lopez, he was still executed for a murder that he didn't commit. So justice in this case is elusive. De Luna was no angel, but Hernandez seemed to be the devil. And in a story like this, there truly are no winners. Wanda Lopez never got to go home to her baby girl that night. And a reminder for all of us to enjoy every moment with those that we care about. And I'll just say the final thing. Don't forget to protect the ones you love and love the ones that protect you.